If you haven't gotten your copy of Bare Naked Bravery, How to Be Creatively Courageous, then head on over to Amazon right now. It could be on its way to your house or into your device before I'm done introing this next episode. I am so honored to introduce you to today's guest. Jonathan DeWaal is with us today to discuss the timing of improvisation, especially as it pertains to seasons of bravery and transition. John is the executive director of this organization called Liminal Space and is based out of Seattle, Washington, which is, yay, love Seattle, they are dedicated to helping others find the courage and means to navigating major life transitions. Definitely appropriate for this podcast. And one nugget of a quote he laid down in today's conversation is, "The gold we're often looking for is found in the place where you find the most discomfort." So true. I know that so intimately well. And so today we're not just talking about the discomfort of transition, but also two really powerful questions to ask when we find ourselves smack dab in the center of a liminal space or a transition period. This could be within the day, within the week, within the quarter, the year, or even just life. So those two questions are, how did I get here? And who do I want to become now? He also gave us a wealth of resources towards the end of our conversation, which I will be sure to pop in the links in all of the show notes for that episode. So thank you so much to John for stepping into today's conversation with your whole presence. I love it when I get to encounter people in that way. And so I'm really honored that I get to share that with you guys as well. So all of us going through transitions, thank you immensely, John. Before we pop into the conversation, let me just say this. You probably know of someone going through a season of bravery and transition. If you do, share this episode with them. So another resource I'll just put out here because it's thematically resonant. The Seasons of Bravery Ritual Workshop is waiting for you at emilyannpeterson.com/workshops. It's a series of videos, it's a guidebook, and 6 steps to help you make plans and attain your goals. You can make it as woo-woo as you want, or you can just make it a pure goal setting, strategy setting session. So if you find yourself in a season where you might need to take a step back and acknowledge the sacredness of discomfort and growth, I recommend that. And I also recommend taking next steps with John's new podcast called Life Through Transitions. And you can go visit him and everything that he does at inaliminalspace.org. And he and I take a deeper dive into my own stories of transition and unpack all of my own liminal space for his audience on his podcast. We kind of did an episode swap with our podcasts. So awesome. I don't get to talk about those parts of my story very often. So if you're curious about that episode, then I recommend checking out his podcast as well. With all of that, I am so delighted to introduce John DeWaal. You're listening to Bare Naked Bravery, a weekly podcast hosted by me, Emily Ann Peterson. As a singer-songwriter, author, teaching artist, and creative entrepreneur, I encounter some really fascinating stories. I'm on a mission to reveal the depth and width of bravery and its benefits to creatives like yourself. More than ever today, our world needs bravery, unique bravery, from everyone. This is the place where you find it. There is no script or censorship today because that's how these facets of Bare Naked Bravery are in real life. So if you're listening with little ears nearby, please know that some episodes may contain mature language and subject matter. One of the easiest ways you can share bravery with the world is to send this episode to a friend or two. Send them an email, text, or tweet, tag them in one of my Instagram posts. My handle is EmilyAnnPete, or leave us a review on iTunes. It takes seconds and can be done from your phone right now. Again, we need more bravery in the world, so let's be brave together. Are you ready for some Bare Naked Bravery?
I am. Let's go.
Let's do it. So, John, you are here and you are with us because you are doing this cool thing called Liminal Space.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about that. And what is the word liminal?
Yeah, it's the question I get all the time. Liminal comes from this Latin word limens, and it literally translates as a threshold is the word. So when you think about a threshold, it's that piece of wood or metal is that space in a door that's between one room and the next. And when you're in a transition, you're standing at the threshold of something. Either you've been kicked out of a room or you know you need to leave and you're aware of the hallway. There's that space of unknown. The next door hasn't revealed itself quite yet. It's a space filled with a lot of questions, a lot of difficult feelings, choices that need to be made, on and on. And especially for the individual, it's a place of formation if they allow it. So for me, with the clients I work with, we're on that threshold of whatever that transition is, exploring that space, both for who they are in their heart and in their, their own thoughts and their own beliefs. We're in that space to really discover a practical way to move forward to what is that next door. So it's that blend of coaching, counseling, career development work. A lot of my clients also bring their faith to this journey from one door to the next through that hallway. It's who am I in the context of the larger story that I think is going on. So, in a nutshell, that's what Liminal Space is. And we do that with one-on-one work. Groups who are going through a transition have that similar, transition they're sharing together. We also do a lot of workshops on transition and navigating the complexity of whatever the transition might be.
And what drew you to this?
Oh man, that's a question I can answer in about 30 seconds or the next 2 hours. Because there's things that are written into my story that definitely I can say draw me to this at a very early age. I felt like I was in these conversations with folks who were, going through different life experiences. One friend in particular who was going through a relationship ending, but at the same time before that ending, a loss as he got his girlfriend pregnant. And they had a baby and there was a miscarriage. And, walking with a good friend through that in the teenage years and being a voice of truth, of encouragement, of care, asking questions. I've always been a question asker. And so what drew me to this was, I think, this innate just longing and desire to connect with people in that space where they're stuck, where there's just a lot of confusion and uncertainty, believing that, more than just being an empathetic presence, you can actually help people get unstuck. And for me, I have my own places where I got stuck. Back in 2007, I graduated from a graduate school out here called Mars Hill Graduate School. Now it's called the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology. And I got my master's there. And moving out here from Michigan, thinking, all right, I'm gonna leave this job that I was doing in bank marketing, and I'm gonna really pursue something that I want for my life that is bigger than what I was experiencing in Michigan. And when I graduated from graduate school and had started a business at that time to make ends meet, because I had a wife who was pregnant with our first child. I had school loans coming due. I had a mortgage that was brand new, like all of these like adult responsibilities. Right. And they all were tied to money and needing to make an income. And so that's the way I answered those questions, those money questions, was to start a contracting business. And I remember when I bought my first ladder for that business, and I set it in my garage. And I said out loud, I was by myself, but I said out loud, this is going to take a long time to get out of. And so in some ways,
wow.
that ladder got chained to me in that moment. And it took me 4 years to release that chain through circumstances that I would never have chosen. But for me, it was a 4-year.
You built a business. Contract work.
Yep. Built a business. And that was back in 2007. With the economy and the recession. So I built a business, was able to survive all of that. By the time 2010 rolled around, I had a crew of 8 or so painters working for me, and really successful, and but miserable. It's like, this is not what I dreamed about when I decided to move, sell everything. This is not what I dreamed about.
Right.
In the midst
I find that so fascinating that you had the presence of mind to know that this is going to take a long time to get out of?
Yeah, I think I knew that to do this well was going to require a bit of a runway. It wasn't going to be something I could turn into a living overnight. And I just knew that it was years. It wasn't months. And I think in that statement, this is going to take a long time to get out of, what I wasn't able to articulate, but what I think my soul was wrestling with is this question of, well, what do you really want to do with your life? Because you know this isn't it. And you know some of those traditional routes that you could have potentially taken aren't it. So what is it? And I didn't know what it is. And I was wrestling with that underneath the surface of that question, how am I going to make a living? And that question was just so front and center that I don't think I was able to hear or give the attention to some of the other questions that I needed to be. So it was a bit myopic at that time.
Let me ask you this, because this month's theme of the podcast is improvisation, specifically the timing of improvisation. In your experience of working with all of your clients and also in your own story, how have you seen that the timing of those questions play a role in that liminal space?
Yeah, such a great question. The liminal spaces by nature, by default, like have questions.
Right.
And the ones that found me during that season of life, I didn't necessarily choose. They chose me, and the timing of them chose me. I fell off a roof and broke my ankle 4 years ago. And it was one of those situations where I knew it was going to be a game changer. And I remember that first night in the emergency room where I had spent a total of about 2.5 weeks in the hospital getting surgeries to put it back together.
Oh my gosh. You really broke your ankle.
Really broke my ankle. Yeah. I landed under concrete. Yeah. It wasn't like, just throw a cast on it. No, the doctors said like, look, it's going to take multiple surgeries. And you need to look at this in a different way than I can tell you are. This is more than just a cast and 6 weeks off your feet. If you don't do what we tell you, you're going to lose your foot. So from that moment, he had my attention. And so the season that I stepped into stirred up all of these questions. And that first night of the emergency room, I was laying in the bed next to a friend and in tears said out loud, I do not want to do this anymore. And if I could go back 4 years earlier, it was so attached to that ladder. It was so attached to that chain. And it was so attached to what I was saying in that moment was there's a question underneath that and many other questions tied to that. What do you want to do with your life? What do you want? And that's a scary question. And so improvisation, there's a choice, I think, for everybody as they go through a transition. You can either take the quickest, most available answer to those questions and get out of that transition, believing that any answer is better than staying in the discomfort, or you can choose to sit with that question and chew on it a while and maybe bring in some resource to help you figure out some of those questions and what will those answers be. And so I think just in our culture, we don't know how to do that. We don't get taught how to, a question just surfaced. It's really hard. It's difficult. How do I address it? How do I chew on it? How do I, bring others into help? We don't do that in a natural way. We're prone towards like, just get me out of the discomfort. And so I really teach that space where questions surface and pop. And because of the disruption you've been through, teach that transition it's a discipline. It's something you learn. We all go through change. We don't all fall off roofs, but we all go through some form of a change and experience throughout our life. It's probably one of the one things that we have that's really in common, no matter what culture you grow up in. But transition, that's something different. We have a choice in how we let the change really metabolize and be understood.
We've only talked once previously, so I don't actually know if you have experience to answer this question. If you don't, that's fine. How do other cultures deal with transitions? I mean, I'm like somewhat familiar with how other cultures deal with like the end of life transitions, but in terms of like the common transitions that we go through as humans these days, like we graduate school or we leave our parents' home or we get married or we have children, those are the common transitions that we go through. But I just imagine, well, I guess I have two questions. I imagine that because these other transitions, like falling off of a roof or getting diagnosed with a hand tremor or getting diagnosed with anything really, those are the more like culturally uncommon transitions. And so I imagine that those are at times can be difficult because of that.
Yeah.
But I'll stick with my first question. How do other countries and other cultures deal with transitions?
I don't know that I can answer that question.
Okay.
I can just tell you that ours in particular, as I've, studied it and worked with others in it and watched gone with myself through them. They're not things that we enjoy. We don't enjoy transitions. We don't look at them as opportunities. We look at them at best as inconvenience. And we don't see that there could actually be the very thing we're most longing for in life. We don't actually see that to be located in the transition. We think it's located on the other side in the answer.
Wow.
And my work with folks, and I struggle with this too, just because I'm a human, just like everybody else. Like, no, the gold you're looking for is right in the space where you feel most discomfort. And perhaps that discomfort is tied to the question that you're most asking or the questions you're asking. And those questions are helping you really articulate what's true to you. What do you most want? What do you most need to let go of in order to find and hold what you want? All the things that are tied to courageous choices to build a life that is satisfying, gratifying, moving you closer and closer to who you're supposed to be in the world. And without these times in life, some of those questions that would lead you there, they lay fallow. They lay undiscovered. And so I think that's the gift. And if a person's perspective can shift towards learning how to wait and stay in them, what a huge gift to yourself as you go through not just this transition, but future transitions. Mm-hmm. And in our culture, we don't teach that. We teach on demand, get it now, waiting sucks, on and on and on, right? And I just don't think that's really doing us a kind service by moving past these moments too quickly. I think a lot of us are suffering from transition deficit. It's that friend that who's like, you know what? I had this conversation about how much you hate your job literally 6 months ago, and then you changed to another job. And we've done this same conversation like 6 times over the course of the last 5 years. Maybe you're choosing to go past some questions too quickly, tied to like really what you want and really what's going on in the patterns of that transition that you're moving too quickly away from. What would it look like to stay and approach this moment, this transition differently? And so, that's not something that I think comes natural. It needs to be taught.
No, for sure. I mean, I can completely agree with that. I mean, you look back on, we've got some like distant family members who've been not family members, but also like coworkers or other people in our family who have been married like 6 times, and they're just serial monogamists, which is fine. If that's your choice, that's fine.
Yeah.
But it does also lead me to consider like, well, maybe they are not asking the right questions about themselves and their, relationship pattern, their relationship transitions.
Right. Because they're the common denominator.
Right.
Right. So like one of the questions that you can ask in every transition, even the one where I fell off the roof, how did I get here? Did I contribute in any way to getting to this point? I got on that roof the day after it rained in September, and it was a 25, 30-year-old roof, cedar shake, and it was moldy and mildewy, and I knew it was slippery because I just watched another guy try to get on it, and I asked him to get down off the ladder. How in the world did I get here to that point where I got on that same roof and fell off it not 3 minutes later after getting on it? I mean, that's staring in the mirror and really asking the question, was it my arrogance? Was it my Dutch practical, like hard work ethic that said, you got to get this done? There was something in my story that got me on that roof, believing that I could do the work and that I'll take the hit, whatever that looks like. Right.
Yeah.
I need to own that.
Right.
And I need to own that I put that chain around my leg when I bought that ladder, and that I chose to primarily think through my future through one lens, one narrow lens. And that's what I could see at the moment. And I did need help to see something bigger. But there's things along the way. I need to own how I got here. And then I also need to own, who do I want to become as a result of seeing what I see now? And those are things, and I promise you, you can't tell me a story where those aren't true. Where, that question, especially, who do I want to become? I've heard some horrific stories, right? Yours, even just talking to you, like losing the gift of a calling and the beauty to be able to like play an instrument to the ability that you could, and knowing that can't necessarily hold its same future that you thought it was going to. Tragic, right? And yet you have chosen a path of, who do I get to become in light of the story I now have? And it speaks to the human, resilience and hope and desire for more.
Well, it's been so interesting after my own transition and that liminal space. I think we're always going through liminal spaces now that I've gone through that one.
Yeah.
But now that I have gone through it and have had a lot of conversations with people, we all go through this I'm seeing a common theme that health is often a trigger for people to start asking these massive questions.
Totally. Yeah. It's the, the diagnosis, it's the everything from your blood pressure is high to you just had your first heart attack, you fell off a roof, or your hands tremoring. Health diagnoses are huge, like instigators to really, it's the equivalent of either, a 1.0, 2.0 earthquake to 9.0 earthquake. And that rupture of the ground, that's what brings the questions to the surface. Yeah. And then the choice is like, I got to change something here.
Right.
I have to make some choices here that might lead to a different story. And then you see the person drop all the weight and start eating better and exercising and caring for their body in a more kind way, perhaps. Things shift when you're willing to stare at the truth of what a question holds for your life, or a change of some kind.
We'll get back to the bravery at hand in a second, but I wanted to remind you that I first began having these conversations both on and off the podcast because I was curious about what bravery actually meant. If we could build it, if so, with what ingredients? And I was so curious, I turned my research and personal stories of experiences with feats of bravery into a book. That book is called Bare Naked Bravery: How to Be Creatively Courageous, and it's now available in multiple formats on Amazon right now. So go get yourself a copy of Bare Naked Bravery: How to Be Creatively Courageous, and after you read it, let me know what you think. Do you have any stories from clients that you're allowed to talk about that would kind of lead us to more of that gold that's found within that discomfort that you were talking about?
Yeah, definitely. There's one story that I come back to often, and it's intense in the way the change happened for her, but it's so profound. And I have permission to tell her story. Her name's Jessie. Jessie was traveling with her family 5 or 6 years ago around the holidays over to Leavenworth, and a tree fell on her roof, on the roof of the car.
Whoa.
And it was a big tree. The snow had fallen and made all the trees heavy, combined with low rainfall the summer before, making the trees more dry and weak. And so the tree fell on their car, and it instantly killed both her mom and dad in the front passenger seats, and paralyzed her. And so she's a quadriplegic. And at that time in life, in her early or mid-20s, had already been able to articulate a passion and a calling in her career. So she had loved teaching. She had loved teaching kids, and an amazing teacher as well. Like, absolutely loved her work, had discovered it at a fairly early age, what she wanted to do. So overnight, or in an instant, literally lost the ability to move and function with her body normally. And also was injured so greatly that she couldn't do her work anymore in the way that she was doing it. And then, of course, lost her parents. I mean, so loss after loss after loss, disrupting all levels of meaning in her life and purpose.
Right.
So literally the first 2 years are all about just simply like, how do I be alive? How do I just feed myself, dress myself, all the different things that one would have to learn. She actually learned how to walk. She's a walking quad, which is quite something to see, like literally someone who's paralyzed train her muscles to respond still.
Wow.
Spends a lot of time in her chair, but has done all of that work to figure out what it means to simply be alive. And when I met her, one of our opening conversations were, and now that I figured that out, I want a life. Like I want purpose. I want meaning. I want to figure out what it means to find work again that I love, find relationships that are rich. I want to be married someday. I want to go on a trip. She showed me a picture of where she wants to go someday with her spouse that she had not yet met. Right. And she said to me, like, this is a lot to sign up for. Right. So she knows she's going to have to find a man who's got some courage, right, to step into a story like that. And so all of these things we start to unpack and talk about, and the questions tied to what do I want to do with this one life that I've been given in the midst of these circumstances that she can't get away from, no matter how hard she wishes she could. Yeah. So there's that work. And then there's all the grief tied to letting go of what she couldn't do anymore, or have anymore, or sit with and talk with anymore, like her mom and dad, and so much there. And in the process of our work, one of the things that she began to discover and name was she loves to travel. She loved to travel before she had her injury. And one of the trips that she references is this trip she took with her mom, where she first began to really fall in love with travel. It's life-changing for her. And as we started remembering that during our work together, she began to name just how much she wants that to be a part of her future, even as a quadriplegic. So she has been on a number of trips across the globe. Wow. With her chair. She usually brings a friend along to help with some of the needs that she has. But what she says, it's more than just about going to see cool things and see places. It's about moving into a story that is one marked by desire and freedom and discovery, and stepping into places of vulnerability, places in my own mind and heart that are blocked because of what I've told myself is impossible, and wanting to share that with others. Yeah. So she's speaking and talking to others about the power of travel and what that can do for a person. And she's discovered this more and more since her accident. Yeah. She's starting a business as well. She's dating. She just bought a house. She's doing independent living now. Like all these things that were made available to her because she showed up to her questions. She learned how to stay with them. She kept asking more and more and chewing on those questions. And that's something that I think she discovered so much about her own capacity for growth and transformation, even in the midst of those circumstances. Mm-hmm. And no matter what you've gone through, you get to decide how you respond.
Right. That is in my book. When we were talking about power of choice, especially in regards to like having somebody cross boundaries of yours.
Yeah.
And you encounter really awful things, like instances of injustice, where like, it's not just, a diagnosis that happens, but it's like someone invaded your space and invaded your life and your personhood and your being. Yeah. And in those moments, you can feel like you don't have a power, like you can't do anything about it. You feel really stuck and frozen. And it is so refreshing to hear stories like this that prove that like you do actually still have power of choice, because you always control how you respond to something. Mm-hmm. And that can be just the tiny little like ledge of a rock in the wall that you're trying to climb or that you've been backed into. And it's not easy. It's not fun. It's discomfort. There's a lot of discomfort and pain in it. But yeah, thank you for that reminder. That's really great.
Yeah. And in those moments when you feel powerless because of something that someone said or did, in the same way that they were able to take power from you, it flips the other way as well. Not to take power from them, but if that can happen in that way, couldn't it also happen that you respond in such a way where you take back what was never theirs to take in the beginning?
Yes.
Right? Couldn't there be words or choices or ways of moving forward that bring back what was yours all along? Quite often in these moments in life when we're disrupted during these seasons of change, we encounter moments that we see certain ways of seeing the world are under strain. Our beliefs about ourselves, about what our identity is attached to, these things get put under strain, and some of them break and need to break. And we're really left with an opportunity in these moments to say, well, even in spite of what's been taken from me or what I've lost, how do I still acknowledge that I have the power to make different choices, to move forward? Maybe they took away a lot. Maybe they took away your job. Maybe they took away your instrument. Maybe whatever it was taken away from you.
Right.
But you still have such a gift here, the freedom to choose your own way.
And I think a lot of times what we do have control over is the timing of how we respond, as well as not just how do you respond, but do you respond right away? Yeah. Do you respond later? Do you wait? Do you?
Yep.
So shifting a little bit into more of the timing from what you've experienced in your own work, how do you see, is there a typical pattern of timing or the way that a liminal space unfolds? Is there a life cycle or something that ends up happening?
Yeah. I would say it's not, first do this, then this, then this. It's not one of those really clear paths, but it's a bit more circuitous, and there's multiple things happen at once. But I would say that there are chunks of the journey that you can anticipate. And some of this is borrowed from William Bridges, some of his work on transition. The theory or the model that he shares is that there's typically an ending that begins a transition, and that's brought on by some change. And it could be a diagnosis, loss of a job, end of a relationship, moving to a new city, any number of things, falling off a roof. And in that ending or in that change, there is a reconciling that needs to happen with what that change means for you, which is maybe another way of saying there's usually some letting go and grief that needs to happen. And that's the hard work, right, of every transition is, what is it that's occurred? Why was it meaningful? What does it feel like to you to know that that's not going to be there anymore? What does it challenge in the way of your identity that was meaningful and now it's not? It's really that work to allow anger and tears and hurt and pain and even some shame and self-contempt and other, all these feelings, all that stuff starts to surface. And if you don't honor it by listening to it, it's going to go somewhere. Right. And it's usually going to store inside you and fester and make you make choices that probably aren't all that good for your future. So I always talk about it's necessary to listen to that stuff during the ending, letting go season of a transition. Done well, that can move you into this second phase, which is about, William Bridges calls it the neutral zone. And that is a season or a space where there's certainly a good deal of ambiguity, but that's where some of the good questions tied to desire surface. It is what's next. It is the wondering. It is the space where curiosity grows. Imagination can be reordered for your future. It is a space where creativity can be honored, where you can experiment, where you can put on new clothes and try them out for a while and see if they're a good fit, and ultimately make choices that move you to a new beginning. Right. Where there's an actual arrival point, whether it's the new job or a new community or a new relationships or whatever it might be, which is a place of celebration and a remembering of the journey. And what's really hard for people in a season of change and transition as they're moving through this, it's on one day, it feels like ending, because whatever's going on in that day, it feels like grief. It feels like loss. Right. The next day, it feels like movement and progress and discovery. And then the next day after that, setback. And it's wait a second, I thought I took steps. I thought I arrived somewhere that was distinct, and it turns out I'm not, and I'm way back here. And what was I foolish to think I was way over here? No, actually, it's just the awareness that at any given moment in transition, all three are true. There's ending, there's neutral zone, and there's new beginning. You ever notice, like, when you go to even a funeral, there's the acknowledgement of the loss, but then you find yourself having these conversations that bring laughter and like stories and connections and like bizarre like experiences of all these different emotions and conversations and stories all blending into one moment. And it's like that, right? It's like that. You are in that season where you will encounter many different things, and you need to remember that just because today feels like a kick in the gut because of that setback and it makes you feel like you're at ground zero, it's probably not true. It's probably what you're seeing isn't the full story. And you need to be reminded that, no, like, look, you have discovered these things. You have named this as true about your life. You are doing that work of letting go. Mm-hmm. And I think this is one of the myths that a lot of people struggle with. Grief is not a one-time thing. Letting go is not a one-time thing. That's something that happens really for the rest of your life if you're to become more human. You will go through, you don't just be done with grief. You become a container for grief. And grief, when done well, and expands, it not only expands your ability to hold more grief, it expands your ability to hold joy. They go hand in hand. And I think that's what transitions can really start to form in a person is it'll teach you in the midst of the grief and the joy and the question of who do I want to become, and really build towards a story that's really, really good.
Yeah.
I can start to preach.
No, I love it. And it's so much of it, I just have to like sink in and go, yes. I agree. So we haven't done this in a while, but I'm assuming William Bridges wrote a book of some sort. Mm-hmm. Are there other books or resources that you would recommend someone take advantage of if they find themselves going through a season of liminal space or a season of bravery or whatever they on it?
Yeah, Transitions is William Bridges' text. It's the title of it. Making Sense of Life's Biggest Changes, I think, is the subtitle. That's one I would recommend. He outlines the phases and then certainly some of the stories that go along with it from his own experience, which I found it's assigned reading for every client I work with. But for those that are going through questions of purpose, questions of calling and career, I think David White, Whyte, is a wonderful resource, both in his poetry, but also
love his poetry.
Yeah, it's so good.
Poetry makes me feel alive, and I don't.
Yes. Yep. He's got a poem called Sometimes, and the end of that poem goes something like, questions that can make or unmake a life, questions that have patiently waited for you, questions that have no right to go away. And I just love that. I love that, the way that's framed. And that is what's happening in transition. But anyways, a text that he wrote, Crossing the Unknown Sea, Work as a Pilgrimage of Identity, I have found so helpful. And then I think another text that for those that are looking to understand aspects of their story and its connection to their future, To Be Told is another great text. To Be Told, how to know and tell your story well and its connection to your future.
And David wrote that as well?
No, that's Dan Allender.
Okay.
Is the author. Yeah. So those are a few great resources that I would recommend.
Great. That's wonderful.
And I'm in the midst of writing a book, and hopefully someday I can have, come back on your show. And
of course. I mean, just some of the visuals you've described today in our talk, I thought, oh my gosh, this guy should write a book. This has been such a joy to get to do this with you. So thank you so much for joining us. And I thank you again for letting me come on into your community and share my story as well. I really appreciated that.
It was so good to have you.
Oh, and we were able to talk about some of the stuff that I haven't because of your expertise in this, like in the discomfort, the season of discomfort, you and I were able to talk about parts of my story that not everybody asks about. Because like we've already said, like our culture tends to like speed through the difficult, uncomfortable parts. So, I definitely do not shy away from darkness and like heavy things. So I just loved it.
That's great. Thank you.
And I'll make sure to put the link to that in the show notes so that you can check out the books that you talked about and also our previous conversation. So
and that's with our podcast called Life Through Transitions.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Great. And you also you mentioned before we got into today's talk, you were talking a little bit about this liminal strengths assessment.
Yeah.
A little bit about that.
Yeah. So that's an assessment that we came up with that measures seven different dimensions. And I'll list those in a second. But what we're really studying in that diagnostic tool is how is it that based on past transitions you've moved through, what has supported you well? How do you move through past transitions? What's your approach? Because if we can understand your approach to how you're listening to the questions that are surfacing and all that's being churned up, we can listen to what's working. We can listen to what you're avoiding. We can use it as a tool to understand more of what it might mean for you to go through this next transition different. Because quite often it's the approach we're taking to listening that's not working.
Right.
It's what creates a stuck pattern, a transition deficit. And so we need to slow down a bit and first say, like, how have you been journeying through these seasons, these moments in your life? And so those dimensions are resilience, planning, community, self-care, self-honesty, action, and faith. And we've found that all 7 of those are showing up again and again in the research as to what helps move a person through a transition and be successful, whatever that looks like for them in their life. Yeah. So that's what we've measured. That's what we've been measuring with that tool, and it's just come to be a really helpful diagnostic tool. But you can find that on our website.
Great.
At liminalspace.org.
Great. A wealth of wonder. Thank you for that. This has been so fantastic. I have so loved chatting with you today, and I have so many more questions because I love curiosity.
Yeah.
But I also don't want to take up all of your time. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, you bet. It's good to be on your show. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Beyond your free bravery bundle, which is always available at emilyannpeterson.com, your brave takeaway from today's show is to ask those 2 questions mentioned in this episode to a friend going through transition. A reminder, those questions are, how did I get here? And who do I want to become now? So asking those questions is really healing and helpful, especially if you are able to actually sit down and listen to your friend's answers to those questions. When you have a witness for your own transitions, it's immensely healing and helpful. But being a witness to someone else's metamorphosis is equally so. So we would love to hear all about your favorite parts of today's Bare Naked Bravery, especially if you actually accomplished the brave takeaway from today's episode. You can find Jonathan DeWaal and myself on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and all the other places. If you do post about us, make sure you tag us so that we can cheer you on and like it and follow and do the whole things. All of the links, including the links to purchase the books mentioned in today's episode and how to get in touch with Jonathan a little bit more in depth. All those links are in the show notes for this episode. So that's our show this week. Thank you so much for listening. Again, we put all the links in the show notes. Be sure to visit us online for all of everything that you could possibly want in terms of bravery. Just visit emilyannpeterson.com. And if you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it for you, then I encourage you to share this episode with a friend. If you are digging the music in today's episode, that's because it's brought to you by Lee Rosevere, and you can find out more about all the other artists and musicians and other sponsors of this show by visiting our page on emilyannpeterson.com. I am looking forward to being with you next week. We have some awesome things in store for you. So until then, I have one message for you. It's the same message as always. It's this: be yourself, be vulnerable, be imaginative, be improvisational, be brave, because the world needs more of your bare naked bravery.